Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. Just a quick reminder for those of you listening on the audio podcast players. Yes, we have the ads. I've finally been able to create an Apple subscription. So if you want not to listen to the ads for $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, you can subscribe on Apple and listen ad-free. And I'm about to do that with Supercast as well, which will allow you to listen ad-free on any podcast player for same price, $50 a year. You get a discount, or $5 a month, or become a subscriber on the Substack. And do check out my affiliates. You got the Black Friday stuff going on with Above Phone and Start Mail. Thanks to my first listener who purchased a Start Mail subscription. I've been using them for 10 years, and they give you a discount, half off for the first year, so you can test it out. Okay, joining us for the first time is Ammon Blair. He's Senior Fellow for the Texas Public Policy Foundation's Secure and Sovereign Texas Initiative, where he advocates for effective border security and immigration policies that protect the sovereignty and safety of Texas and the nation. He's also a consultant for Omni Intelligence, a private company that provides intelligence and analytics service to government agencies and media about transnational and domestic threats to Texas and the U.S. He has over 10 years of experience as a U.S. Border Patrol agent serving in the Rio Grande Valley sector, one of the busiest and most challenging areas of the southwest border. He has firsthand knowledge of the operational and strategic challenges faced by the Border Patrol and other law enforcement in securing the border and enforcing immigration laws. He's also a 20-plus year Army veteran, both as an enlisted soldier and as a commissioned officer. He served in various leadership and staff positions, including as an infantry platoon leader on Operation Lone Star, a joint military and law enforcement operation to enhance border security and public safety in Texas. Welcome to the podcast, Ammon.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Quite the experience you have and background. And today we're going to talk about all the immigration, border stuff, cartel issues. And I've been reading some of your writing over at Washington Examiner, Blaze. And maybe to start with one of your most recent pieces over at Blaze, where you wrote a piece titled "Democrats Once Undermined the Army, Now They Undermine the Nation." And, it's got a bit of that flavor of, this Civil War narrative or scenario that's been going on for years now. Movies have been made about it. They continue to be made about it. Politicians and pundits continue to warn about it. Most recently, Steve Bannon and Tucker Carlson. And you write, quote, the left, their post-Civil War Redeemer ancestors smeared troops as despots and usurpers. Today's left smears ICE and Border Patrol as fascists. Different century, same betrayal. And so maybe from your vantage point, can you tell us what's going on in America with the left, the right, and the tensions that are brewing?
Yeah, sure. Specifically on that article, what I wanted to do is I wanted to show that the current political atmosphere right now is pretty similar to what was happening post-Civil War era in the Reconstruction in the South, where you had blacks that were now free, or freedmen, as you can read in my article, and the federal government had to protect them at the voting stations and whatnot, so that they could vote, so that they had freedom, so that they were part of our Constitution and Bill of Rights. And the Southern Democrats at the time didn't want it, and so they actually utilized a street level communist organization that was based off of race, and that was the Ku Klux Klan. And they used the Ku Klux Klan the same way that is being used by, whether that's Antifa, extreme left in the streets, the communists, the anarchists, same type of where it's going to be destruction, chaos, violence, to try to thwart federal troops and federal law enforcement to cease and desist their operations. So the same thing that was happening back then. And unfortunately, it worked back then. There was a compromise, and that compromise in 1877 led to the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878, where it stated that the federal government could not use our military for civil law enforcement inside the United States. So now, fast forward to today, that's what you're seeing. You're seeing judges, whether that's in Oregon, California, or in Illinois, go after the National Guard, saying that their mission inside the United States in support of ICE and Border Patrol is unconstitutional based off of the Pars Comitatus Act. So once again, you have over 100 years later, the same party going after the military to protect federal law enforcement. And instead of, back then it was on black slaves and black citizens, now it's on the entire citizenship as it stands today. And in the form of, they want us to be slaves to whatever agenda, whether that's a communist agenda, whether that is oligarchical or whatnot. And so that's kind of the parallels that I made in that article.
And maybe just to go a step further, something else you wrote, you mentioned the word globalism, and listeners of the podcast obviously should be aware by now that I am anti-globalist, and globalism relates to, as you mentioned, I would consider aspects of communism, also aspects of fascism and other isms, monopoly capitalism, technocracy. But you write, quote, today citizenship threatens a different order, the globalist one. Citizenship implies borders, duties, and distinctions. So progressives seek to redefine it as exclusionary or immoral. Illegal aliens become newcomers, quote. Enforcing the law becomes oppression. The federal obligation to protect citizens morphs into a liability. And just any further thoughts on that? I think you're correct to identify. I think citizenship is a good thing. I've lived in half a dozen countries. I have 3 citizenships. And I always say, people should be allowed to migrate always legally. I myself could never imagine a scenario where I'm living illegally in a foreign country. I wouldn't want to do that for my end because I think it's wrong and unethical. And so just any thoughts on, this globalism, progressivism, and citizenship?
Yeah. So for the most part, whether that's the UN, the World Economic Forum, the global organizations that seek to take away control from sovereign countries, and so that way they can control. At the end of the day, it's about power and control. And they realize that there are many mechanisms where they can continue to rein in their power and control, whether that's the control of food, whether that's the control of oil and gas, or the financial system. And that's where World Economic Forum comes in, where they have that public-private partnerships with the largest global financial institutions. And then it's funny when you look into this, all those that were supporting and funding the weaponized mass migration that was coming through Mexico into the United States, all of them had all the organizations that were assisting on the ground had complete ties with the UN, World Economic Forum, and all these global organizations that were utilizing at that time a human being and exploiting human beings for their end goal of eradicating the sovereignty of nations, and to make the world dependent upon their systems. And so that's why I mentioned globalism, and that is a lot of times many people think that it's only countries or Mexico that is to blame, or even the Biden administration that is to blame for the invasion of not only your country in Mexico, but also our country in the United States. But there are a lot larger players at play in the global geopolitical environment that seek to completely thwart the sovereignty of each of our nations. And you can see that now. You can see the same global organizations doing the same thing to Europe. You can see the same thing happening in the UK. You can see it happening worldwide. They tried doing it in Japan. And luckily they have now a new prime minister that is ending that. And so this is a whole global movement to eradicate, once again, sovereignty, so that way they can gain all complete control and power.
One of our past guests, Ben, who's a Christian from Texas, who set up a community down in Panama, Corazon del Cielo, when he was on the podcast a few years back, he testified to what you just outlined, that you had all of these supranational globalist agencies, United Nations, and other NGOs, because he's down in Panama, you got the Darien Gap and all that, and he actually saw with his own eyes that maps were being handed out, financing, and I checked. I saw a video, a clip from Texas as well, where it costs about, I think, 10 grand now to pay the cartel coyotes to get you across. And years back, when I was taking taxis or Ubers, when I was in Texas a couple years back in California, I talked to the drivers, and there was one driver who was from Latin America, and she was in America illegally, and I had to speak with her in Spanish because her English was poor. And I asked her about this, and she said, "Yeah, she paid 5 grand to cross the border." And yeah, that's the situation. And maybe to get your thoughts on this issue of the illegal migrants in America and the attempts to deal with them by the different agencies, ICE, CBP, DHS. I'm from Chicago, and I'm seeing videos from the streets of Chicago where my illegal aliens, whatever one wants to call them, are being approached by ICE in parking lots in Walmart, and so on and so forth. How do you sort of assess the situation, and then how it's being dealt with? How should it be dealt with?
Sure. Just take a step back. The pipeline into every one of our communities inside the United States was actually originally created by the Mexican cartels. The cartels in the late 80s in Mexico is when Mexican citizens started to have their own private property rights, like in 1988 and 1989. That's when you saw at the subnational level where the PRI, that one party rule that Mexico had, started losing power. And then by the 90s, they lost a lot of gubernatorial races as well. And they started losing power nationwide. When that happened, the Mexican cartels at that time period used to be under the rule of the federal government. It was a symbiotic relationship. And so the cartels, they saw this as an opportunity to seize power and control at the local level. Just like any mafia would, like the mafias that we had in the United States, the Italian mafia, like the mobs. And so they saw this as an opportunity, but they started to expand and they started having wars between themselves, and they started becoming an insurgency. And then that's when the American military came in and assisted the Mexican government. Then they sent their special forces to train with ours, with our Green Berets. And then later they became the Zetas later on. But during that time period, as we know, the cocaine trade shifted from the Caribbean to Mexico. And so that also spiraled the cartels to grow exponentially as well. And then they needed to move all this product from the southern border to the interior of the U.S. to get to their customer base. And so in order to do that, they had to build a kind of like a Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. But in the underworld, they had to get the necessary population to do so. They had to get vehicles, stash houses, local law enforcement, federal agents, military, all forms of society, every facet of society they needed to breach into and move so that they can move whatever product they wanted into the United States. And so now, fast forward to today, and by the way, like, you're not going to see the level of violence in Mexico as you are in the United States, and that's all by design. If your audience wants to look and research the difference between the Medellin cartel in Colombia versus the Cali cartel, the Medellin were very super hyper violent, and the Cali cartel operated like a foreign intelligence or foreign service agency, where they were completely involved in counterintelligence. That's how the cartels operate inside the United States. They operate like a foreign intelligence or foreign service agency, completely counterintelligence. Everything is run by cells. Everything is decentralized. There's degrees of separation between them, the intermediaries, contractors, subcontractors. And so now fast forward to today, they have that complete pipeline now inside the United States. And so when the first wave of illegal aliens started coming across with those caravans, like in 2014 under the Obama administration, I was a border patrol agent back then. We saw that the cartels really saw an opportunity to be a part of the weaponized mass migration and to take advantage of it. And so that means that now, from that point on, and probably a little before, anyone who wanted to come across, you weren't just dealing with smuggling organizations. You mentioned cost, and that's why the cost had to rise. Because now the cartels saw this as a great opportunity and completely took that over from and controlled and used the smuggling organizations, even your mom and pop shops on both sides of the border, as their contractors or subcontractors. But they took complete control over both sides of those plazas. And so now, when you're seeing when you were talking to your driver and she's paid $5,000, a lot of people don't have $10,000 in cash, especially U.S. dollars, to pay a coyote. They don't have that much money to pay the cartel. So what ends up happening is they become indebted servants. So all these people coming into the United States now are still indebted to the Mexican cartels. So what you're seeing is the largest slave trade in American history, in the Western Hemisphere, largest ever. And so when we see the illegal aliens, whether that's in Chicago or anything else like that, you got to see that they're not just being exploited by the Mexican cartels. They're not just property of the cartels if they have not paid. They're probably working for the cartel, licit or illicit businesses, like general contractors and everything else like that. So they're being exploited by labor, whoever they do work for inside the United States. And then they're also being exploited by their own countries. Look, if you look at the GDP of a lot of the countries in the Western Hemisphere, how much of that GDP is based off of remittances to their country from their citizens inside the United States? It is astronomical. And so that one human being that's coming across, not only is he a slave to the cartels, he's a slave to the corporations that are hiring him inside the United States, now a slave to his own country that wants that remittance. And so when you look at it like that, and you look at it from, if people want to talk about humanitarian relief and humanitarian crisis, they don't mention the rest of those issues. They only see ICE going in and doing raids in a Home Depot parking lot, in construction sites, in the streets. They don't see the scope of the entire, or the situation in its entirety, in terms of the illegal alien issue that we have here in the United States.
Yeah, and just to respond, I mean, for listeners maybe who are super critical, I would say your assessment, and look, I'm an American Mexican, even though I'm a Slav, I'm a Croat, but what you just laid out, I would agree with, either when it comes to the history you gave of PRI, and in the early days, it seemed like the government did have the upper hand when it came to the cartels. Yeah, we do have research that I believe it was the FBI, the CIA, FBI shenanigans. But I would agree with your assessment that that's how it was, that history was correct. And then it kind of spiraled out of control, as well as what you mentioned about the debt. Yeah, there's people I've talked to as well where they end up in those situations. And, just to give a good example, a member of my church here in Mexico, so he went illegally. I think he went legally, but then he overstayed the visa. He just ended up staying in a decade in America, a Christian, law-abiding illegal migrant. But because of his conscience, the Christian ethic, he realized he's in the country not legally, and he decided to self-deport a year ago. And so now he's here back in Mexico. He can't go back to the U.S. unless I think he has 10 years he has to wait to try it before he can apply legally. So I think that's a good example. But I do want to just ask you, so I agree with what you're saying, but I've met in the U.S. Illegal Mexicans, and there are, apart from what you laid out, there are Mexicans who go legally, they overstay their visa, and then they end up being there legally. Or perhaps some that are able to pay their coyotes and they end up they're not as indentured servitude, but they're just well-meaning people. Any thoughts on sort of that segment of the illegal aliens?
Sure. Yeah. So now we're delving into the realm of what is a citizen, what is a nation, and what is a state, and what is sovereignty. So if your readers haven't, if you haven't, I would highly suggest reading the book by Victor Davis Hanson called The Dying Citizen. And he's a professor in California. And he goes over the global elite and everyone else, the whole idea and concept of what citizenry is in times past, whether that's in the Roman Empire to today. And so right now what you're seeing in the streets is you're seeing ICE now being at the enforcement arm of the U.S. Constitution in terms of defending what citizenship is. There needs to be a clear delineation between the term and definition, rights and responsibilities of a citizen, a foreign national that's legally present, and then also an illegal alien. If not, if those terms and definitions, if those rights and responsibilities were to ever be muddied like they're trying to do right now, where it's one and the same, then the whole idea and concept of a sovereign nation no longer exists. The sovereignty of the state or the nation starts at the sovereignty of the state, and the sovereignty of the state starts at that sovereignty of the individual. And so that's why the global elite want to eradicate the whole idea, concept, and term of citizenship, because they want you to be a serf. They want you to be dependent upon them and not have those inalienable rights that are protected through our Constitution. So so at Texas Public Policy Foundation, our research and our stance is that this whole idea and concept, what we're doing is we're actually defending the actual citizenship itself. So anyone who is present here unlawfully needs to go through the proper terms or proper way to come into the United States, just like in any other country, Mexico or anyone else like that. And so we are in support of, regardless of how you got here, regardless if you were a visa overstay, regardless if you were able to pay the coyote, regardless of any other means, if you are illegally present, if you are inadmissible and you don't have the proper documentation, we are full on support of the Trump administration that you need to return to your country of origin. And if you do so right now, like your friend said that he self-deported, right now there's a program on CBP One app that if you process and you self-deport, then it actually bypasses that 5 or 10 year wait to come back. So that's also incentivizing a lot more people to go through that, because before how Biden used it was to get into the US, right? To bypass the immigration system and to get in the US. Now what it's doing is it's creating a mechanism where you can go in and they're promising for you to return. They just want this completely controlled inside of a system, so that way we know exactly who, what, where, why, how, and when everyone is. And also vetting. Like, it's really difficult. I remember when the Chinese started coming across the southern border. It was right after China opened up their borders from COVID, because they were very draconian in their measures. And then when they opened it, you saw a massive flood of the Chinese going through the Darien Gap, and then coming up through Mexico into the United States. And it was my area, the Rio Grande City Station, in the RGV sector, that was the primary target before they shifted over to California. And so when we did that, at first it was taking like good 3 to 4 hours for our intel team to validate each Chinese illegal alien coming across, just because there's so many ways and means that person could be tied to the CCP, right? And so fast forward, because we were getting inundated, that it went from 3 hours of interrogation to try to vet to 4 questions, 4 or 5, and then we were releasing them. Our system was not capable of handling that. We just did mass release. We released them to people. We couldn't even vet the people that we were sending UACs to, that were still trying to find thousands upon thousands of unaccompanied Indian children. And so the vetting across the board, whether you're a sponsor or an illegal alien, we just couldn't do it. So right now, that's what they're trying to do. We need to bring back our immigration system, bring back order, the rule of law. And so they're trying to do this in a step-by-step manner. And their priority is actually that you do so by your own means, like your friend did. Go through the CBP One app, sign up, go, and then eventually come back.
I'm going to let him know about that. And, again, what you're describing, I cannot disagree with. There was another report last week I saw of a Polish family who came. I don't know if you saw that one. They came long ago, but the mom, she's probably in her 50s or 60s. She's ended up overstaying her visa for 20 years, doesn't even speak English. And so her kids were born in the US. And I guess the father has citizenship, and the mom will be deported back to Poland. And I'm just thinking, like, that's kind of your own fault. I mean, how can you stay 20 years, not regularize your situation? And I'm, like I said before, I lived in Kazakhstan for 3 years. I was a teacher there, and I knew a Mexican friend there who would do a border run every 30 days because he didn't have a proper visa for Kazakhstan. But they had the loophole where you can, run, leave Kazakhstan, enter into Uzbekistan, and come right back into Kazakhstan. And I would never subject myself to that. It's just get citizenship. And then what you say, I remember when it was at its height, the mass migration, Turks were coming in. I read numbers where there are 30,000 people from Turkey. You mentioned Chinese. I got one of my Christian evangelist friends called me up a few years back where he preaches on the border in Texas, and he's like, there's a whole bunch of Russians. There's just a mass of Russians coming in. They don't even speak English, coming in through the border illegally. I do want to ask you about some of the actions that I've seen read about ICE, CBP, DHS. You've got the surveillance issues, face scanning apps, and maybe strong. How would we term it? Where they used strong force, and then one of the threats, one of the fears I have is that. I get what you're saying so far, but again, as an American and being wary of totalitarianism and tyranny and authoritarianism, what Edward Snowden talks about is turnkey tyranny. So, maybe the Dems come back into power, and this thing that was created under the Trump administration, they continue, the momentum builds where you have now all of a sudden sort of this like federal authoritarian force. And any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. Great question. So the guys in the streets right now that are causing to disrupt, they're looking to completely disrupt any immigration enforcement whatsoever. And so before they actually had a think tank themselves, it was crimethink.com, THINC.com as opposed to K. I think after the designation that they were designated as domestic terrorists, that they took that down. But they actually had operational plans on how to completely disrupt and destroy any involvement with ICE and ICE operations. And so we started seeing that. And these are self-proclaimed anarchists, Antifa, as others will call them, and also communists. And so that's what was happening. The attacks in Oregon were happening. They were attacking federal facilities, just like what they were doing in 2020, and without anything. In fact, there was not even a single arrest until the day after they were designated as domestic terrorist organizations. They were continuously attacking. So what ended up happening is the Trump administration, because of this, he realized that in DHS, Kristi Noem looked at the personnel that they have within DHS and said, what agency has the capability and capacity and the training enough to be able to withstand massive riots or massive protests at such a scale, so that way we can continue to do operations. And that was only the Border Patrol. So Border Patrol agents because we are the largest federal agency, Border Patrol is, and the level of training is somewhat paramilitary, since we do have to operate on the border and conduct not only immigration enforcement, but counter cartel operations, to include mostly our BORTAC and BORSTAR Special Operations Group, as well as conduct intelligence. And so all right, so what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to bring the Border Patrol agents as federal agents into the interior. Because ICE, what many people don't know, ICE are actually not federal agents, they are officers. And there's a distinction there. That there is a distinction between just an ICE, their level of training and their level of authorities, versus a federal agent, their level of training, their level of authorities. So they had to use the type of personnel that they needed to conduct these operations. So when you're seeing the videos of less lethal use of force against them, that is to try to stop them from disrupting their operations. And what they're saying, that it's peaceful because they may be blocking, but in terms of U.S. law, if you block any federal action, that is seen as disrupting. But the problem is like you said, we're trying to. The left wants us to act very violently. And that is because they want to, and it's called Russian reflexive control. They want to, because they've deemed us as fascists, oppressors. They want us to look like that in the media. So that way they can gain support politically and in power. And so they're all for continuously pushing the rioters to continue to do things because they know that all they need is a one viral video, and then you have a George Floyd event. And so they're going to continue to push and push and push and see the resolve within the Trump administration on what they're going to continue to allow. So just imagine yourself now, you're a Border Patrol agent asked to go from the border to the interior to try to protect your sisters in arms or brothers in arms, ICE, so they can just do immigration enforcement. Now you're being pushed and pushed and pushed, told not to have a CNN moment. And so you're seeing a little level of decline in morale because there's actually not a lot of prosecutions that are actually happening. And so you're seeing a lot of disruption happening. And then that's why they're asking to call in the National Guard. Because now what you're starting to see is the groups, the contractors, the Mexican cartels, like the tier one gangs, like Latin Kings, are now putting hits on Border Patrol agents. Like the 10,000 hit on the head of our sector chief, Bovino. And so you're starting to see now this convergence of foreign terrorist organizations, the cartels, their proxies, whether that's tier one gangs like Latin Kings, using this opportunity, this strife and political discord to also get in the mix and cause rise within these areas. And so that's what you're seeing here. You're now starting to see like a hybrid, what we in the military call a hybrid threat environment, where it's a convergence of criminality, insurgency and subversion, terrorism, and even nation states that are all supporting this. So that way they can actually conduct other operations of destabilization inside the U.S.
Before I ask you more about the cartels, I just wanted to mention I've seen ICE job ads everywhere on the X feed. I think they give you 50 grand sign up bonus plus a salary. And I thought about it for a minute, but I wonder if ICE would take me because I'm an American Mexican, so I'm a naturalized Mexican. So I wonder if that would, in their mind, create a conflict of interest. But also, what you said, watching these videos to enforce this stuff, you got to have a high morale, and it's difficult. I've seen the situations that these ICE Border Patrol are in. But before getting to cartels, I just want to mention two things that bother me related to the DHS. So you may not know, listeners know that 3 years ago, in April of 2022, when the Department of Homeland Security rolled out the Disinformation Governance Board, I learned from Mike Benz. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Mike Benz. He's been on Tucker Carlson, the Freedom Foundation. It turns out that the DHS and its sub-agency CISA told PayPal to ban me, which is political persecution. And I saw some lawyers in Florida just yesterday. They're fighting. They're doing a lawsuit against, I think, J.P. Morgan, who debanked conservatives, right, for political ideology. And so I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that. Just any thoughts on sort of that. When it comes to the DHS, and then there was a second article that I came across recently where the DHS wants biometrics from immigrants, but they also said, including U.S. citizens who sponsor immigrants, who try to get them, lawful papers. My wife is only a Mexican citizen, so if I were to move back to America, I would sponsor my wife, start the paperwork, but that means the DHS would want my DNA, which I wouldn't be happy about. So any thoughts on the DHS and some of the stuff that they're up to, such as I'm still banned from PayPal, and then some of these things like, taking DNA even from U.S. citizens like myself?
Yeah, and if you can control thought, you can control actions. If anyone's read, if any of you guys have read 1984, we know that the Orwellian environment it was alive and well under the Biden administration. We had gag orders as Border Patrol agents, and they were looking at to politically attack anyone that was opposing them and to go after them. And then, like you said, and that's what your worry is. Your worry is Are they going to infringe on my constitutional rights? Are they going to go after and go above and beyond? Is this going to eventually lead to tyranny? And if Donald Trump sets the stage and prepares the way for it, is someone going to come in then after them and then complete what Biden created that targeted you? To include those financial institutions like JP Morgan that went after conservatives, or like what you saw in Canada where they went after the truckers and they went after their pay and they stopped their complete pay. And then exactly what we're seeing in China, where it's all social credit scores. Everything in that banking system is all social credit related. And so 100%, I agree with that assessment. That is what it was leading to. They were trying to control any dissent away from the narrative. That's why they would say that nothing's happening on the border, as they would say that the day that I would receive 1,000 illegal aliens, and then the cartel would move narcotics to our left and right like it was open season. And yet you had Mayorkas go out there, try to control the narrative in media saying that nothing is happening. And so I saw it 100%. I lived that Orwellian life in terms of that. Now, in terms of vetting, we still, unfortunately, to this day, do not have the ways and means to vet every illegal alien, as well as to vet all the sponsors. And I think that's why they're going towards DNA. As a border patrol agent on the border, it was very difficult because I saw women spit into babies' mouths to make it so that their DNA, when we were going to do cotton swabs, would be the same because they would drug the children. Because on the South side, so how it worked was this. We would create a policy. The U.S. would create a policy. The cartels needed to move their product from point A to point B, this being a product of humans. And so they're like, okay, if you're going to release this package into the U.S., I need to, on the South side, create that package. And they would do that based off of nationality, the age level of the children, the level of criminality that you have, because some crimes we'd still release you. And so that's what they would do. They're like, okay, the U.S. government is releasing Nicaraguans that are married, that have children under 7, that are this, that meet this. So on the South side, the cartels would then steal children, create fake documents, and then that were certified through the federal government. So we were catching federal officers in Mexico that were stamping these fake documents, and then they were bringing them into the United States as a quote unquote family unit. And so I was part of the unit in 2019 that had to try to break these fake families and find the kids that were being trafficked. And so now, fast forward to today, when they came in under the Biden administration using those false documents, now in our federal system, whether they have work permits, social security numbers now, you name it, it is now based off of that false identity. And so now we have to try to figure out ways and means to not only vet those who are trying to come in now legally, but now vet every single person that was now here brought in under the Biden administration, when we know full well that a lot of the documents that they presented or didn't even present were completely wrong. So what the cartels also used to do is they used to have the illegal aliens ditch their documents. So then they would come to us and be like, I am so-and-so, I'm this age. And if we didn't have someone that could break that, all right, like if you're Chinese, all right, my name is this, I am Jackie Chan. You're like, okay, Jackie Chan, all right, Bruce Lee, you're now inside the United States, and that is now your federal record inside the US, and you now have codified US documentation saying that you are Bruce Lee or whoever it is. And so now we have to go back and try to vet every one of those millions, because we let in millions of people in doing so. And in their idea, it's going through that CODIS system, the DNA through the Department of Justice, and trying to figure out who anyone is at that time period. That's kind of a long answer for that.
So I guess I'm between a rock and a hard place, because I mean, as you say, what you laid out, I've read about that as well. That yes, there are fake families and all that. Let me ask you about the movie Sicario, Benicio del Toro. I enjoyed the movie. I believe I saw the sequel. not it's rarely as good as the first, but I think it was enjoyable as well. And now we're hearing you wrote an article as well for Blaze that I read. Where is it? Trump cartels are now unlawful. Um, um, Sorry, it's getting a bit scrambled here. Cartels are now unlawful
Yeah.
combatants. About time. And I can attest to having lived here in Mexico for so long. It's hard to explain to people. It's like a paradox where
Yeah.
if you mind your own business and live in a certain part of the country, you're generally okay. But I've had on Ed Calderon on the podcast. He's been on Joe Rogan talking about this stuff. And the madness is when I first came to Mexico in 2010, and I was just renting a home that was not in a gated community. My home, in the space of 2 years, was broken into, burglarized 3 times before I finally decided to move. And I've had former colleagues who were kidnapped, parents of students who were kidnapped because they were wealthy businessmen. I've read about home, like in my vicinity now. I had a former British colleague. He was a journalist. He's in Mexico City now, working for Amnesty International. But he would report on, a half hour from where I live, they'd find homes where people are kidnapped, renditioned, barrels of acid, where bodies are dissolved. People can look at Blog del Narco. I watch videos every week of how narcos are burning people to death.
Mm-hmm.
I saw one last week where they caught an enemy cartel member, but just the fact that this is going on, they had a high-powered rifle, and they literally blew the guy's head off. I mean, he was lucky because he went out quick, but they just killed the mayor in Michoacan, which was insane. Yeah. And so, and extortion, I talked to friends and friends of friends, they tell me, oh, my car was stolen, but we had a GPS tracker. We called the Mexican police, and we said, hey, we know where the car is. Can you get it? And the Mexican police are like, only if you give us $2,000, we'll get it back for you. Otherwise, you're on your own. And then people who open businesses, and then the cartels come to extort, and then they have to shut the businesses down because it's basically slavery. And so I can attest to that. This is a serious situation, and Mexico is in dire straits. And so, just that out of the way, get your thoughts then on how to deal with the cartels. Whether it's the stateside, Trump apparently has approved military action to Mexico. We're seeing, drone reconnaissance into Mexico. So do you have any thoughts on how to deal with? And then we're also seeing U.S. government. I think by now they've canceled the U.S. visas of 50 narco Mexican politicians, and they're shutting some of their bank accounts, which I think are good initial steps. And it was just reported that my governor, Pablo Lemus, obviously wouldn't be surprised, is a narco governor. And so any thoughts on this situation, and whether you think we might see action beyond the border?
We could. Right now, he's waiting. Most of the action that you guys are seeing now, that everyone's seeing, is in the Caribbean, and that is towards Venezuela. So you're seeing the narcotics coming in from Venezuela and in Colombia, like through Tren de Aragua or Cartel de Suns. And so really there hasn't been really any action towards Mexico or the cartels. They have largely been trying to figure out ways and means for President Sheinbaum to do it herself. But I will say that it is sad that another country has to tell another country that they need to secure their citizens. And that's where you know that the Mexican cartels are in a symbiotic relationship at the subnational all the way to the federal level in the government in Mexico. And so we are not dealing with a 1990s Colombia where we're going after Pablo Escobar. We are dealing with a situation like in Afghanistan with the Taliban, where they're so intertwined together that we can bust all the fentanyl labs we want. But that's not going to do anything really to the organization, the cartel, when they're everywhere and they're in every trade. You talked about extortion. We can talk about agriculture. The cartels dominate agriculture in Mexico and Michoacan, where the mayor was killed. In Jalisco, the avocado trade, the citrus trade. And so long as here in the United States, we are dependent on Mexico to feed us, really that's supporting the Mexican cartels. So our fentanyl numbers may be going down, but so long as we continue to increase the amount of foreign imports inside the United States that the cartels control, they're negating the loss in fentanyl. They're also going up towards Canada as well, or they're bringing their operations and pill presses inside the United States. So unfortunately, how this needs to work is a whole society approach or an international approach to go after the Mexican cartels. We can't be the only country to make these claims and statements that they are now we are now in a non-international armed conflict with enemies of our state, and those would be the cartels, and that by definition, by Geneva Convention definition, which would then mean that Mexico is a state sponsor of foreign terrorist organizations or material support of them de facto, if they do not go after them proactively without our force, especially since the cartels, CGNG and Sinaloa, even though Sinaloa has split, but they are still in 65 other countries. And so what would benefit us geopolitically is if the U.S. got together with all the other countries that the cartels are present in terms of narcotics trade, got together and were to force diplomatically Mexico to deal with the situation, the corruption, and completely eradicate the cartels within and without the Mexico themselves. I think really that's a big key takeaway. I know that about a month and a half ago, the Poland actually wiped out a Mexican meth lab on the border of Germany. And when you looked at the pictures of that, they had to use their terrorism task force to take them out. They went in there with UH-60s or Blackhawks. When you look at that, it's the same barrels, same operations, same supply chain, same everything that you would see in a facility in Mexico. And so that supply chain is now global. So I say foreign diplomacy, of course, going in and trying to force Scheinbaum to do the right thing, to go after, whether that's within her own party or not. The party line should not matter. Right now, what should matter is Mexican citizens and your guys' safety. That's really, at the end of the day, what should matter. But you guys recently had a director of the Morena party come out and say that 70% of the elected officials are working with the cartels. And so he's a pastor. I forget his name. You may know his name, but he's a pastor as well. And he was speaking at a religious conference when he made that declaration that 70% of the party, or especially at the local level, are now all cartel. So this is going to be a whole of government approach. Whenever you conduct foreign terrorist organization, counter-terrorism overseas. When you look at military doctrine and you look at foreign internal defense, when we have to eradicate an insurgency, subversion, terrorism, other adversaries that may have an equal stake in the game, like the CCP, it's going to take all forms of society to eradicate that, not just kinetic attacks. So right now you're seeing, I guess it was NBC News that declared that we're going to go in, that we're training right now to use our special operations under CIA to do operations. But if you look at the U.S. code, it's not on Title 10, which would elicit kinetic actions. It's actually under Title 50. Title 50 is more like your covert operations, like CIA, and that intelligence collection. We're still trying to figure out intelligence because, as you know, the cartels, not only do they have the latest in spyware, because whatever the Mexican military has, they have, but they also have encrypted trans communications throughout the United States, headquartered inside in Mexico. So in order to break that, we have to use military, our own capabilities to address those threats. So really, at the end of the day, that's what you're going to see. You're going to see, I hope that you see more international diplomacy to force Scheinbaum to attack the threat from within. We continue to see the kinetic action in the Caribbean that is not going to directly impact the civilian populations of Mexico themselves, and then try to get it done that way before we go in and do like kinetic strikes inside Mexico, boots on ground. I advise and assist like we did in the Middle East with Mexican special forces, so on and so forth.
Yeah, just to add my 2 cents there, Mexican government was the first to purchase Israeli spyware, Pegasus.
Yep. Pegasus.
Then there's Luis Chaparro who does great work. He's a Mexican American journalist. He covered Titan, which is another software
Yeah.
apparently, and they sell these licenses to Mexican authorities. They can just type my name in, type our name in, and it pulls up all the databases they have on us, bank accounts, your cell number, and then they can geolocate you because of the pings of the cell towers. And as you mentioned in that report from Luis Chaparro about Titan, which the back end was also created by Israelis, that I was going to say that those licenses, because as you mentioned, there's you can't tell a difference between the government and the cartels. Those licenses are shared or resold to cartels, who then can find any of us anywhere. And it's funny when even Mexicans they make these memes where you'll have some Mexican political functionaries who are kidnapped, and the government immediately deploys these technologies of Pegasus and Titan and whatever else they've got, and they can locate. They quickly locate the kidnapped politicians. But then you hear regular us Mexican citizens, oh, we're left to our own. We're left for dead. And just to add to what you're saying, I know two Christian Mexican former law enforcement who had to quit because, again, that's that Christian biblical ethic where I'm not going to participate in this corruption. But there were so many of their coworkers and colleagues in the Mexican police force or whatever agency they were in that were in on this, and they had to quit because they otherwise they couldn't continue. I mean, it's that bad, the corruption. And just to add, apart from the mayor Carlos Manzo, you had the Lime Grower Association leader assassinated recently. I mean, there's avocados, and it's just kind of like, it used to be, okay, you guys do your drug running stuff, whatever, leave us alone to grow limes and avocados. I mean, come on. And now it's gotten to that point at every sector of commercial sector of society. You can't be an honest entrepreneur anymore. And that's destroying the economy. You got foreign direct investment who's looking at this every day. 50 semis are hijacked, last I checked, in Mexico. And so, I mean, this is not sustainable. And I hope something is done with it. We need 1,000 Carlos Manzos. He said he asked Scheinbaum for help. She left him for dead. And so, just any quick thought on Cuba, because we talked about Venezuela, and I've been saying for the past year that I think Cuba is going to fall. I know people who are going to Cuba regularly on humanitarian missions, and I've said the situation there is disintegrating. People don't have food, electricity. It's like toast. And then I read an article this week from Foreign Policy saying how it looks like Cuba might fall because there's that link to Venezuela. And any thought on Cuba at all? Is that
if you look at the history of Maduro and Hugo Chavez before him, and how they came into power was actually from Cuba. Cuba is also an epicenter for Chinese intelligence, as well as Russian influence and Iranian. They are part of that nexus or that axis of power on the Western Hemisphere to work as proxies for our greatest adversaries. So there's Cuba and Venezuela, and all the extreme left countries are now siding with them. And then you saw recently that Mexico is now going to start trading oil. Now that we're starting to impact Venezuela, you're seeing that Mexico is now going to start trading barrels of oil with Cuba to bring in oil into Cuba itself. And so 100%, we're going to see that Cuba, of course, is a communist state and working hand in hand with Venezuela. They are just strategically in place, perfect for intelligence operations for our adversaries. And so the thwarting Cuba and their government and their systems is also going to be key, just like Maduro and his government and their systems. It is all part and parcel as an entire network that seeks to overthrow the United States. And whether you're a democracy in the Western Hemisphere or you're a republic like us in the Western Hemisphere, you have those key nodes of Iran, Russia, and China that seek to thwart us or seek to control us. And that's what China does. Yes, China is an adversary, but they also realize that they also need our money and our sustenance. So like a leech, like a cancer, they need that symbiotic relationship where, yes, they want to destabilize us so we can't counter them militarily, but they still want us and leech off of us.
And I guess to close out, any other thoughts, final thoughts, on the way forward, given everything we've discussed, the left, the migrants, the proper use of authority, the cartels, and so forth?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, we all need to realize that one, we're all God's children. We all have inalienable rights, and that the U.S. Constitution was set up to protect those rights, but also those responsibilities. Everyone always talks about rights, but we also must now talk about a citizen's responsibility. And as I said before, the sovereignty of the state starts with the sovereignty of the individual. And so self-reliance, getting into independence so we can become interdependent with each other as nations is going to be key. That means also the respect of nationhood and sovereignty of each individual nation. When Scheinbaum asks for us to respect her sovereignty, the sovereignty of Mexico, and that's why she doesn't want the military, we also expect the same. She shouldn't try to rile up Mexican citizens in the U.S. to go after ICE or Border Patrol. And so it's dual-hatted. But at the end of the day, this is about protecting the whole idea and concept of individual and a country's liberty, the ability to have these inalienable rights, to have life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of our happiness. And that's why I like talking with you, those of you that are in Mexico or what other country you're in. And I was just recently in Canada as well as Hungary, talking about the exact same thing. That at the end of the day, that's all we're looking for is a safe safe community, a safe nation to be able to raise our family, have a good life, and not be at the behest of whether you're a global organization, a tyrannical government, or a foreign terrorist organization. So the eradication of all those ways and adversaries should be at our forefront, and so that we have, like I said, liberty at the end of the day.
And there's a Mexican citizen. I can complain. And you mentioned Scheinbaum. I would argue, even some Mexicans, we laugh at this, that she doesn't even respect the sovereignty of Mexico and Mexicans when she downplays and pretends there is no insecurity situation, which she recently said. It's like you're literally going against our own sovereignty because we can't conduct honest business. So what sovereignty can one have as a Mexican? And where, if people want to know more, your links are in the description, but where should they go to?
Sure. Yeah, I don't have social media, and so I tell everyone to go to our website at Texas Public Policy Foundation. Now there, you can go to texaspolicy.com. You can see all of our research, my team's research. I am part of the Secure and Sovereign Nation campaign, where we focus on all things security, sovereignty, and liberty related, not just for Texas, but the entire nation, to include Mexico and Canada.
All right. Thank you for coming on the program, Ammon.
All right. Thank you for having me.